Hey everyone, this is Melissa, and I'm the talkative introvert. Welcome back to the podcast. If you're new here, thank you for checking out the pod. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and decide to keep listening to more. If you do, please spread the word and share it with your friends and family. So for today's episode, I am joined by Shane Rogers. He is a comedian, pundit, author, musician, and co-host of the popular Midnight Facts for Insomniacs podcast, and also co-hosts the political debate podcast called Square Off. So Shane, thank you so much for joining me on this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I already know this answer, but I have to ask for the audience. Are you an introvert, extrovert, or somewhere in the middle, an ambivert? And what is your favorite and least favorite thing about it?
So I am by nature an introvert. I am someone who is definitely, especially when I was younger. I mean, I was an only child. I grew up sort of spending a lot of time alone. I'm used to kind of being my own best friend for a long time. But life has kind of pushed me in different directions. And I think I've pushed myself in different directions to sort of access, not extroversion, but the ability to sort of flip a switch and at least fake it pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
So as you mentioned, I do stand-up comedy. That's something that you kind of have to, you have to be able to get out of your shell. So it's something that I've worked on a lot over the years, but by nature, I am definitely an introvert. And there are a lot of things that I think are actually kind of beneficial to being an introvert, or at least the type that I am. But overall, I think what I dislike most about it is just how much energy it takes for me to interact with people in social settings. And I just wish that, I know people who feed off of that and it sort of energizes them. And for me, it's very exhausting. So it can be, I still can have fun. I can always have fun in social situations, but then I need to recharge. And I just wish that it were the opposite, that I sort of, fed off of being in public.
Yeah, I completely understand that. Like, I wish it did. It feels like someone said, someone called it a social hangover. I think it's like Brene Brown that said that. And it's exactly how it is. Cause I remember just recently I spent a whole week doing something social almost every day. And by like the fourth or fifth day, I literally just sat on my couch and did nothing the entire day because I was just so drained and tired that I didn't want to do anything.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it, social hangover, because that is exactly what it feels like. It's like, I need to recuperate, and I wish that it didn't take that long. I think over time it's gotten to be less. Certainly before COVID, I got to the point where I needed less and less time to recharge. And after COVID, I think COVID sort of slipped me back in some ways into a slightly more introverted state. I mean, we were all, doing our shelter in place. And I got really comfortable with that. And it kind of felt like a step back. And now I'm sort of having to get back to where I was pre-COVID.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I've gone back to pre-COVID just because I work from home now, whereas I used to work in the office. So I really am just secluded. And then when I do my podcast, I'm in the same spot. I do my work and I also live here. So it's just like all in one place.
I think that's the case for so many introverts, that COVID was a mixed blessing. I mean, it really was very comfortable for a lot of us. I was fine. I mean, I spent a year and a half basically, at home. We live right by the beach in Santa Cruz. So we're very lucky that, we have beautiful scenery to go out and enjoy, and things to do. And, I have my wife here, but she was actually an essential worker. She was doing, she was in college, and once college shut down, she was doing some waitressing. So she was still out and about working. And so I had a lot of time alone. And I was just going and jogging on the beach, and the beaches were empty because, there were no tourists out there. And so it was just like, yeah, I mean, it was a paradise for me. I had the world to myself, and I just didn't have to interact with anyone, but I could choose to go online, and we had the podcast. And so I was doing a lot of interacting on Discord with our fans. We have a pretty a pretty active Discord community. And so that was a lot of my sort of social outreach and, communicating with other comedians a little bit. But it really was my comfort zone. I was really happy. My wife, it was starting to really wear on her. It was tough. She doesn't, she's someone who's kind of in the middle. She definitely likes to spend a lot of time alone. She can be very, she has sort of a solitary aspect, and she's definitely a little bit more of an introvert, but she needs to, like, her occasional recharging is like needing to be around people because she grew up with 5 siblings. And so she was really used to having people around. And so in some ways, she appreciates her time alone because it was so rare and like precious when she was younger to have time alone. So she very much appreciates it. But then I think until COVID, she didn't realize how much she needed at least to spend time around other people and interact because she was just so used to it. So for us, it was very different. For me, I was in my comfort zone. I was really happy for like a year and a half of COVID, and she was really starting to struggle. But like I said, I think it's a mixed blessing because as comfortable as it was for me, and as much as I sort of enjoyed that, like I said, I sort of did feel like I slid back, and I think a lot of people are experiencing that. They ended up now working from home. They ended up, getting into sort of a routine of just not going out. And it's been, while it feels comfortable, it's also not maybe the best thing for a lot of us introverts who would benefit from being put into situations where we're kind of forced to be around other people so that we get that interaction that we normally wouldn't seek out. So yeah, mixed blessing.
Yeah, I agree. I do miss some aspects of work, and there is a lot of things that we miss out on when the fact that we're working from home. Like, working from home for an introvert is amazing. I love it. It's great. But there's like little things. Like, you can't tell someone's body language through a meeting. Like, we're not recommend or not recommended. We're not, what's the word? We don't have to be on camera. It's
We're
our
not
choice if we
required.
want.
Yeah.
Yeah, required. Thank you. So we're not required to be on camera. So we can't see each other. We can't tell like our body language. We can't, assess the situation because, a lot of your speech comes from your body language too. And just little things like that. And like being able to just walk over to your coworker's desk, or like even getting to know your coworkers and having that kind of relationship. It's very just black and white. And yeah, we just don't have that interaction anymore. And even though I am very, very much an introvert, I still miss some aspects of it. And you do kind of forget how to be a person, or like be in a presence of another person.
Yeah, I felt really weird actually going back to work. I remember so my day job, I manage a spa and health club at a resort, and I have a pretty big staff. I mean, before COVID, I had about 50 staff members. I didn't see them all every day, but it was, it was a good amount of people that I was interacting with on a daily basis, whether I wanted to or not. And it was very weird going back to work and sitting in a room with people. And, we were all kind of initially trying to social distance, but you were still in a room with humans, and it felt alien to me. And it was really weird. And I remember the first weeks when they lifted the mask mandate and everyone was like taking their mask off and seeing people's faces and having to worry about, for men, one thing, like I didn't shave a lot. Like I would, if I went to the store or something, I didn't care if I looked scruffy because I had a mask on. It didn't matter. So now I had to like start shaving and caring about what my face looked like. And it was all stuff that I hadn't had to think about in a long time. But it has been really beneficial. It did make me realize I get most of my socializing at work and through comedy. Before, comedy shows would force me to go out and be around other comedians, and a lot of other comedians, surprisingly, are introverts. I think that's something that people don't know, is that a lot of people who are sort of introverted and or antisocial go into comedy. So a lot of us sort of understand each other, and comedians can kind of hang out. A lot of times comedians are, they'll be cracking jokes and things, but sometimes they just sort of hang out with each other very individually. Like we're all sort of sitting around but in our own little world, because a lot of us are introverts and are, and or, like I said, very, very averse to other human company. So it's an interesting mix. But but it was something that forced me to get out. Like I would do, my typical week, I would go to work and I would be around people all day, and then I would the way that I would kind of recharge would be driving to a comedy show, usually over the hill, usually in San Francisco or something. So I'd be driving maybe an hour, and I'd have an hour to kind of breathe and regroup and be alone, and then go into a big comedy club with a bunch of people and other comedians. And then I would kind of regroup again on the way home. That drive home was kind of like breathe, relax, and, get home and kind of regroup. And so for me, my life, strangely enough, as for an introvert, the vast majority of my life was around people. And I didn't realize, I think, how exhausting that was for me, but also how beneficial. I mean, it did really push me out of my comfort zone. Um, and that's why COVID, like I said, was a regression in a lot of ways for me. I felt like, and I still haven't recovered from it. I still, I do go do comedy shows. I'm writing a lot of new material right now, so I haven't been going to do a lot of paid shows right now. I'm trying to workshop stuff, and so I'm doing less comedy than I was, and around less people. And it's taking a lot more out of me because I just don't have the sort of fortifications that I had built up pre-COVID, and I'm having to rebuild, and that's been a little frustrating.
So when you say you do comedy, like, are you doing actual shows?
Yeah. So, well, yeah. Right now, I'm doing a lot of, I guess, what you would call open mics, but there are a lot of shows. They're just small shows. They're hardly ever. There's much pay. Usually, like you get free drinks, and I don't drink, so that doesn't really matter to me. Um, so, but so the way comedy works is that almost no comedian ever goes on a big stage or a decent sized stage even and does new material. Your new material you do at small venues, and you just try it out. Because something that a lot of people think that comedians, when they write a joke, they're like, oh, this is brilliant, it's going to be hilarious. And they go on stage and they tell it and it works the first time. And that is not how comedy works for anyone, for everyone from Chris Rock to, a guy at your local open mic. They're all workshopping stuff before they take it in front of a real crowd, because you just don't know if it's going to work. I mean, I have a pretty good idea if something's going to get a few laughs, but if it's a 3-minute bit, it might get 3 laughs, and that's not acceptable for comedy. You have to be getting a laugh every like 15 to 30 seconds. And so when you first write a chunk of material, so they have bits and chunks and then sets, and when you write a chunk of material, maybe 3 or 5 minutes, you're going to go on stage and it's going to get a few laughs, but there's going to be a lot of it that didn't work, that you thought was going to work. So it's a matter of revising and sort of unearthing the funny parts of it. And so it's a process, and you start because you can't do that process when you're getting paid. If I'm going to the Punchline or Rooster T. Feathers or Cobb's Comedy Club or the Improv, like the real venues in the Bay Area, I'm not going to go up there and just workshop stuff and see if it's funny and, potentially bomb in front of a paying crowd. Like, you just can't do that. So what we do is, when you're writing new stuff, you start at small venues, open mics, little shows. There's a show that they do at the Paradox every Thursday here. There's a show called Mountain Brewing here. And I'll go just drop in and do sets at those shows. And I'll do a little bit of stuff that I know works right away, just to kind of get the crowd on board, and so that I'm not ruining the show. And then I'll try a bunch of new stuff, and it'll go kind of, it'll be a little rougher. And then I'll end with some good stuff, just so that the next comic has a decent intro and a little bit of energy and momentum. But that's how it works. So right now, because I haven't done comedy in so long, I did a couple shows when I first came back from COVID at the Punchline, and those I just did all old material, because I was just not going to risk anything. And so those went great. But I'm also realizing, like, I just want to write new stuff. I don't want to go back to doing a bunch of stuff that I was doing 2.5 years ago. So right now I'm in the process of rebuilding and writing a whole new set. I'm still going to use some of my old stuff that I really love, but I'm writing a lot of new stuff. And so for that, I have to go to these small shows, and that's been interesting. It's been interesting to sort of feel like I'm starting over in some ways, which is kind of fun and refreshing, but also very, it's difficult. It's like going back to ground zero. And having to feel your way forward. So it's been an interesting experience, but that's how the process goes. And that's where I am right now. If every once in a while I get hit up to do a bigger show, and I have gone and done a couple of them, and then I mostly rely on older stuff. I do some of the new stuff that's working, and then mostly older stuff. So yeah, that's comedy is an interesting beast. I think people have a misconception about how it works, that they think that everyone just kind of goes up and riffs, and it's not. It's every special that you've seen, every hour special that you see on Netflix or HBO, that is completely rehearsed and worked. And in fact, they'll usually record it on 2 or 3 nights in a row, and they'll do 2 to sometimes 2 shows each day. So you can have up to 4 recordings of the exact same set, and then they'll cut between them in case one joke didn't work, in case you said a word wrong, in case the audience didn't respond well to one. So a lot of those, almost every Netflix special that you're seeing was recorded on multiple nights with someone saying the exact same words, and then they cut in between them.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's like you're going through the testing phase. But, well, I work in IT, so that's how I'm visualizing it. But you're testing it through the smaller venues before implementing the code, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, those are beta testing shows is what they are. And then, you get up on there, and I've recorded some things with other comics who were recording their specials. And when I had to do that, I had to wear the exact same clothes. So you come back the next day, they make you wear the exact same outfit because they're going to be intercutting between the two potentially. And you have to look like you looked the next day. They even check like to see that your hair is the same way. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I was just we were me and my husband were watching, I think it's like the All American Barbecue show, whatever. It's like a competition, and they wear the same clothes in every episode. And I'm like, why do they do that? But yeah, they explained it the same thing. Like they can cut different parts, and it still looks like it's from the same day. So I thought that was really interesting.
It's funny. I've watched a lot of specials, and you'll see they'll do a cut of the audience. And so you'll see like, okay, the entire left side of the audience, you can see them, they do a reaction shot. And then then they tell another joke, and they cut back to the audience, and it's the same shot, but it's totally different people.
Yeah.
And it's, yeah, I think most people don't catch that, but at comedians, we always watch that and we're like, oh, that was a different night. So yeah, it's interesting. Or a different crowd. Sometimes they'll do, 2 shows a night. So it's just same night, but a different crowd.
Yeah, that's funny. So I did want to ask though, because you are an introvert, because for me, like when I started the podcast, I read up on a lot of introvert articles, and the typical, I don't know if the average introvert, whoever these people they tested, whatever, they don't really like being center of attention. They don't typically like big groups and tend to be very soft spoken people. So, I wouldn't think comedian as like my career choice or, my passion. And so I just wanted to know, like, why did you pick that? Like, what made you want to be that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think that is the stereotypical kind of idea of an introvert, and maybe even sort of the clinical idea of an introvert. But I know a lot of introverted people who, when they get around groups, are not necessarily soft-spoken and wallflowers. I'm an introvert, but I'm not a wallflower. So I do think there are different types of introverts. I mean, I think we're
Oh yeah.
all, we're a spectrum. And I'm an introvert I'm someone who just prefers to be alone. Like like I said, it really saps my energy to be around other people, especially because when I'm around other people, I feel very obligated to flip that switch and act like an extrovert. And so part of my, I am someone who has the ability, like, and we talked about this. I think, we had a little chat before we ever recorded, and we mentioned, I'm someone who most people, even some people who know me, if you ask them, to describe me, would not describe me as an introvert. They would say he's an extroverted guy. He's very outgoing, but I am not at all by nature. And it is something that I have worked on through the years. I would say in high school, I was much more of a classic introvert. I was definitely someone who, kind of kept to myself, very soft. I don't know if I was soft spoken, but I didn't speak a lot. And, I think there are people who went to high school with me who would not remember me at all. They'd be like, oh, that guy. Yeah, he was really quiet. I sort of remember him. I was that guy. And I made a conscious effort through the years as I sort of went, mostly in college and then getting into the workforce, where it's like, okay, I've got to be a little bit more, social and outgoing and networking. And so I made a real conscious effort to like nurture that side of me and be able to turn it on, to create a persona where I could express myself and be a little bit more interactive and proactive. And so that was something that I just drilled down on and made part of my personality. And also, also dating, like it was something where I was doing a lot of online dating at one point, and you had to kind of create you can't go on a date and not say anything, you can't sit there awkwardly. You have to be outgoing. And so I one of the things that I did was sort of developed a persona for dating and for being out in the world. And that really translated to comedy. Like when I'm on stage, a lot of times I think of the audience, and this will sound weird, but it's not as weird as it sounds, as almost like I'm not dating them, but I'm trying to sort of charm them. I'm putting on that persona of the sort of charming guy who's like going to tell you funny stories and make you like him. And that's at least the idea. And I think it's been fairly successful. And that was very deliberate. It was something that is not by nature, but is something that I have the ability to do. And I think a lot of people have that ability. It's sort of latent, and they're not aware of it, or they don't access it. But again, it can be very uncomfortable. At first, it was really uncomfortable. Getting on stage was not natural for me. The other thing, though, that I know you and I talked about, which is being on stage is very solitary. Like unless you're doing some type of, play, or you're doing improv or something, if you're on stage by yourself as a comedian, it is you have lights in your face. When you're on a big stage, you almost can't see the crowd. You can see sometimes if you go close enough, you can see the first couple of rows. And then beyond that, it's just inky blackness out there. And it's very solitary. You're talking to yourself. I used to practice in my living room doing comedy, and I can pretend that I'm in my living room again when I'm on stage a lot of the time. And so, surprisingly, I think stand up in particular is an art form that people associate with being, outgoing and gregarious, and being around a lot of people and being the center of attention. And it really, in some ways, is perfect for an introvert because no one can talk. No one can respond to you. If they start talking, you can get them kicked out. So, they're not even allowed to interact with you. Like, and so you get to just say the things you want to say without having to worry about an awkward interaction with someone, or like, or what am I going to say that's, what's the next thing I'm going to say that might be the wrong thing, or, what is this person thinking of me? You just say the thing you've practiced and then go home. And the hardest part is probably afterwards, once you reach certain levels. I've done shows where people want to take pictures with you, and you have to, you're actually required to go out to the lobby after the show and, mingle with people, which is less now after COVID. That's been kind of nice is that they don't really make you do the mingling as much. But that was something that before COVID you did have to do, especially if you were like, I would host a lot of shows. And when you had to do that, you would be the person out there kind of talking to the crowd at the end. And so, there are aspects of it that push you out of your comfort zone. But if all I did was show up and do comedy, it's very isolating, surprisingly.
It's like doing a podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like a podcast with a crowd that has to be quiet, except for laughing.
That's so interesting. I would have never thought of comedy as being such a introvert friendly thing to do. Like I don't know if I could ever get up on stage. That's why I do a podcast, because I'm at home.
It's funny, and it's not even just introvert friendly. It's also like I said, people who are, a lot of comedians are misanthropes. Like they're people who don't like people, and that's something that you wouldn't think, but it's totally true. Like a lot of comedians are very, you have to be kind of, a lot of them are sort of cynical and have to sort of make fun of the world and want to get up on stage and make fun of things and poke fun. You have to have an element of, there's something that's sort of adversarial there, right? And so there are, I think, a few comedians who are probably really outgoing and love people and get up and I don't know any of them honestly. If there are, I think most of us are pretty jaded, and it's an interesting group of people who don't like people, who like to get up in front of people. And part of the reason that a lot of comedians like to get up in front of people and do comedy is, again, because they don't have to interact with them. It's a way of saying the things you want to say, but people can't talk back. So you get to get on your soapbox, say your thing, and get off stage and walk away and not have to, actually answer for anything you said, or have anyone challenge what you said, or, now we have social media where they kind of do, but for many years we didn't have to deal with that.
You kind of get to like make fun of the people you don't like without any, I don't want to say without any repercussions, but in a way, because they're like, oh, they're just being funny.
Yeah. And they don't have there's no comeback. Like you get to get on stage and say the things that you've practiced and want to say. And, you can make fun of celebrities or anything else. And, there's no one there to clap back. Right. You just get to
Right,
say your thing and
exactly.
leave.
Yeah. I like that. I love that actually. That's a really good insight I never thought about.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's not something that I really understood before I started doing comedy, and I realized, oh, these are kind of my people. Once there's a reason that we're all drawn to this. It's interesting.
Yeah. So other than comedy, I know you are doing podcasts too. So when did you start doing that? Like when did the Midnight Facts for Insomniacs start?
So this podcast started right before COVID. I had a podcast before, and it was actually called Midnight Speakeasy. And so we had a bunch of logos and stuff that we had created, and it was all, there were a lot of the kind of groundwork had been laid, and it was me and another comedian who's a good friend of mine. And he ended up moving pretty quickly after we started the podcast. So we only got a few done, and then he moved out of town. And so I was sort of figuring out if we were going to do it remote or what we were going to do with sort of all the groundwork that we had laid. And I had all this equipment. And I sort of had a brainstorm. Just, there was this guy that was a good friend of mine who lives in the same town, who I've known since I think he was 16 when we met, and I was like
Oh
17 or
wow.
18. And yeah, we've been friends since high school. And we went to college together. We've been in bands together. He was the singer in a band that I was in for years. So we've been on stage together. We've just gone through a lot, and we have an amazing sort of rapport. Just between the two of us, we're just very comfortable with each other and have similar senses of humor. And so I just thought, hey, I'll hit up Duncan and see if he's interested in this. And we did it. We started doing it in my car. We were doing it in a
Oh
Prius
really?
with with just two microphones and a little Zoom pod track or whatever. And it right away we just felt like there was something there. There was just chemistry, just kind of worked. And so we said let's keep going on this and just see where it leads. And then COVID hit, and all of a sudden we started sort of getting an audience, which we hadn't anticipated. I mean, we really started this thing thinking this would be it was mostly geared toward the fans of my comedy. So I had a small fan base that I could count on that I knew would listen to the show. And so that was, and then the idea was I would be doing a lot of comedy, and I could sort of go to shows and publicize the show. We even had stickers made up that we were going to give out. And I think I gave those out at 2 shows, and then COVID hit and everything shut down. And we still have tons of stickers, which, no one, I'm not handing anyone stickers anymore. No one wants your germy sticker
Yeah.
that's been in your pocket after COVID. So that was, we just had to pivot. What we had considered to be kind of a fun hobby that would feed into the comedy and be kind of a feedback loop where I could also point people to the podcast from the comedy, ended up being the only thing we had. All of a sudden I couldn't do comedy, and we also couldn't do live shows. And at the same time, it started to get an audience, which I hadn't really anticipated, of people I didn't know who didn't know who I was and had never seen me do comedy. And we were pretty shocked at first that it was growing the way it was, and a little bit intimidated by it. I mean, we weren't taking it seriously at all. And, we were doing it in a car, and Duncan, my co-host, it was always like on a Friday night or something. So he would be drinking. He'd be like having a few beers, and then we get in the car. I don't drink, so I was the driver, but he'd have already had a few beers, and we'd get in the car. So he was like drunk half the time for the first episodes, and it was just fun for us. It was just a joke. And then we started, people started messaging us, and we started realizing like, oh, wow, this is picking up steam, and it's kind of, I don't know that this is the product I want people seeing. Like, this is, if people are actually going to be paying attention to this, I want it to be better than it is. And so we got some new equipment. We got into my little garage area studio. We made a little studio, and started taking it seriously, and started really reaching out. We had a lot of time because suddenly COVID was on and there's nothing else to do. And we built this thing into what it is now. I mean, we really leveraged our fans. The fans of the the Insomniacs have been amazing. We have an Insomniac who started our Discord and runs the Discord, and we have a
Oh,
whole moderation
nice.
crew. Yeah, we have a whole moderation crew there. And then one of the Insomniacs runs the Instagram, and they've just
Oh,
been
wow, really?
amazing. Yeah, like they've been amazing. I mean, they did a lot of merch for us. They would actually, we have Insomniacs who are amazing artists, and they have created shirts. So we have shirts by such and such fan on our merch store, and it's just been really. I have a research assistant. One of our fans is a research assistant. She sends me a lot of stuff. So the way our podcast works is that we do a different topic every week, and I'm super into research, and I was very like studious in college, and Duncan wasn't. He's not as into research. He's very smart, but he just doesn't care that much about the academic side of it. And
Right.
so we do this thing where we have a poll in our Discord, and every week the Insomniacs choose a topic, they vote on it, and then over the next week I research it with my minion Llama Trauma. She's my research minion, and then I come and I teach it all to Duncan. I explain everything about that topic. So we've done everything from Scientology to wars to sieges to uh, we did Mormonism, we've done cults, just a little bit of everything. And it's been, urban legends. And so it's been really fun. It never gets boring because we're always doing something different. And we know that that the fans are going to like it because they chose it. So it's been great. And yeah, so that's how it started and that's how it's going. And I think at this point, I mean, it's more of a focus for me than comedy. I do want to get back to doing some live comedy, but I really love the podcast. And especially as an introvert, I think it's even more in my wheelhouse than stand up is.
Yeah, it's like, so when I started my podcast, it was just me by myself because no one wanted to do it with me, which is fine, whatever. Um, but I've really like enjoyed bringing people onto the podcast, and this season, like I've had my friend Bailey on, and we've been friends since high school too, kind of like you and Duncan. Like I think I was 16 or 17 when we met. We were in the same year. And there's just something about talking to somebody else, and especially someone who you're close to or someone that's really interesting or has something interesting to talk about. And it wasn't until like I started bringing my friends and family on board that I started getting more listeners, because I think people just really enjoy that conversation because it's like they're there with you in the conversation. That's at least one of our listeners said that, or my listener, whatever, said that she enjoyed the podcast because it was like being in the conversation with them, like being in the group of friends. And yeah, and I really like the pocket. Like it doesn't drain my energy. It's not the same as being like in a party or being in a family event or something. Like I don't know what it is, but when I do a podcast or chat with people, like when we're chatting right now, like my energy levels are like up actually, versus if I was talking to you in person for some reason in a party, like that would have just drained me. And, like I do call myself the talkative introvert. So I do love to talk. So there's that aspect too, but there's just something about podcasts and talking to, interesting people and your close friends. It just doesn't drain me as much as, actual interactions with people.
Yeah, yeah, I agree absolutely. I think podcasting is so great for people who have a lot to say and don't want to, go out and I mean it is hard to put yourself out there and like drive to locations and whether it's a party or a comedy show or whatever. I mean it takes so much energy, not even just for introverts, but like it literally takes energy for anyone to like get yourself ready to go outside,
Right.
and go
Yeah.
and then drive to a location and then find parking, get out of your car and go to the place and do the thing and get back in the car and drive home and take your like podcasting. You can just go into another room, sit down and start communicating, and you can either do it with a
Yeah.
person, with multiple people, or by yourself. And so it's totally customizable, and you can really tailor it to what is most comfortable for you and what is most enjoyable for your listeners. And that is why I think podcasting has blown up so much. I think it's just become something that people are realizing that they can leverage to sort of suit their needs, and also be beneficial to the world in general. I mean, there are some amazing podcasts that I've listened to that have been helpful for me from a mental health perspective, that have taught me things. It's amazing. I really love podcasting, and I'm glad that there are more and more people getting involved. It's a mixed blessing, because the more and more people that get involved, the harder it is for for our potential fans to find you. But at the same time, I think it has to be that way. It has to grow. People have to, the more people that join, the more people are aware of podcasting. And there's great content out there, because I'm still looking for great content and podcasts to listen to always. And I'm always excited when I find a podcast that I really like. So, it's been fun. This is something that I did listen to podcasts before I started, but not for long. I think I'd been a fan of podcasts for like maybe a year, where I was listening pretty heavily. I started with Serial. I listened to the original. I think that's where a lot of people got on board with podcasting, and then kind of dropped off for a while, and then found a few that I really love, and now I'm a heavy podcast listener. So yeah, I'm all in on this medium.
Yeah, me too. When I first started listening to podcasts, it was mostly just like YouTubers that I knew that started one, or like famous people who started one. Like I wasn't really actively going out there, but now being, I guess, part of the community, like I started my podcast Instagram, met some people on there, met some cool podcasts. And then now that I'm reaching out to like you, for example, and other people who want to be on on my podcast, like there's just a lot of people who have really interesting things to say and interesting things to share. Like my last interview was actually with a teenager. He's only 17, and he started a podcast about teen mental health. And I was like, that is so awesome, because I asked him like how it is in high school. Because when I was in high school, like I'm 30 now. So when I was in high school, that was like 12 years ago. We don't talk about mental health. It wasn't a subject. Like no one, we kind of just brush under the rug. Like, I don't know if you ever see those like reels and TikToks about millennials and their mental health, but like they're funny, but sad.
Yeah.
But like he was saying, like, the education system hasn't really changed, and they still don't really talk about it, which is very unfortunate. But that's what really started him to do the podcast. And there's so many people like that out there who just, they started it because no one talks about it and they wanted to talk about it. And those are like some of the really great podcasts.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it really is democratizing, the sort of, there used to be such a gateway, right, to getting your message out, or to being able to sort of interface with other people like you. It was, you had to get a book published, or you had to go on a TV show or something, and you had to jump through a lot of hoops to do that, and there were people who were sort of gatekeepers who were responsible for deciding who got a voice. And with the internet and with podcast, I mean, I'm older than you, so I was, came up in an era before the internet, when like my band at the time, I remember, we were trying to get signed, and that was the big thing, was like you had to get a record label, because if you didn't, how were you going to get your stuff out there? We were like burning CDs and, selling CDs at shows, and it was like impossible to really get to a big audience. We had a small local following. I went to UC Davis, and so we actually got on local radio there, but like beyond that, it was really hard to get out to a larger audience without having some kind of without having resources or connections or networking. And now it's just democratized. And I think podcasting is just sort of the next evolution of that, where it was, and YouTube, where, initially you could suddenly get your music out on, MySpace, or on, you had different venues now, and different, mp3.com or whatever, all these areas where in Napster, like you could get your music out suddenly to anyone. And you could, and now people don't need to be signed. You don't need a record label anymore. If I can create music I created all the music for like the podcast. We do another podcast for our Patreon every other week, and we have an intro for that, and like I created all the music for that. And you can build a studio for very little money now, and you can make professional sounding music in your garage, and you can get it out and become famous and get a following. You can even do that as a comedian. I mean, you have people like Bo Burnham who started as kind of YouTube celebrities and then just blew up, became amazing. And, these are people who are outside of the kind of traditional framework, right? They're people who otherwise wouldn't have had the opportunities that they've had. And that's just been amazing. And that to me is what podcasting is like, it's just a way for people who have something valuable to contribute, but don't have the resources and or the network to get it out to people. That is, it takes away those layers of red tape, and that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, like you can definitely have your voice heard without any of this extra stuff. Like I started, well, I'm still at home. I'm home. I'm at home right now. And my brother did my intro music. And he also he just used his laptop that I gave him, which is like kind of I think it's like a 7-year-old laptop or something by now. And that was it. And we put it all together, and it's just it's so easy with technology now. Like you really can just have your voice heard, and there's people willing to listen.
Yeah, that's what's surprising too. I mean, it
Yeah,
is
I
it
know.
is interesting how, when we first started, I didn't know how to build it. I think there are two misconceptions about it, and some people start podcasting and think, oh, tomorrow I'm going to wake up after I publish my first episode, and there's going to be thousands of listens, and I'm going to be, I think there is a perception that it's very easy to get into podcasting and get a following, which it's not anymore. There might have been a time when there were so few podcasts that, like, if you started one, you would automatically have a little bit of a listenership. That's not the case anymore. There are so many podcasts that, if you are planning to start a podcast, be prepared to do a lot of marketing and kind of figuring out how to connect with a fan base, because it's becoming progressively harder as more people get into the space. So there is this idea that, like, oh, if I just start talking, people will want to listen, especially a lot of people, I think, who do the kind of Joe Rogan model, and they're just like, oh, if I just, me and some friends get on and start talking, like, people are going to listen to this. And it's like, no, you're not famous like Joe Rogan is, so you're not going to have a fan base right away. You have to have a compelling idea and something that is going to actually draw people. But that's one misconception. And then the other one is like, no one will listen to me. What's the point of getting on here? I'm going to throw it out into the ether and no one's going to listen. And that's not true either. Like, if you get on and you have compelling things to say and you keep podcasting, over time, just your fan base will start to find you. It might not, if you don't do marketing and things, it might never grow huge, but you're definitely going to be able to probably at least find some like-minded people who appreciate what you have to say and benefit from it. And so I do think it's a worthy endeavor, regardless of sort of what your goal is, whether you're trying to, make millions, which is pretty unlikely, or if you're just trying to, like, reach some people and have some meaningful impact in the world.
Yeah. Cause someone asked me, like, what makes you keep going? Cause I don't have a lot of listeners. I don't, I'm not unlike the thousands or anything like that, but I still really enjoy doing it because, like, it's something I like doing. I always have something to say. And also just having or knowing that people are listening. Like, I've had a handful of people reach out and say, like, thank you for doing the podcast, or thank you for being vulnerable and sharing these things. And like, that's enough, I guess, for me. Cause it's a very saturated market out there. There's so many people, and all these famous people want to be podcasters now too. And, everyone and their mom is a podcaster. So it is like unlikely. Like, I highly doubt I'll ever make enough money for it to be my full-time job, maybe someday. But it's nice to know that people are listening and they appreciate it. And like, for me, like, I did the whole introvert thing, and people really like that because I guess the way I talk with my friends and like how I talk about the subject is interesting, and they relate to it. It's not like a robot reading them an article. And that's kind of what I enjoyed about your guys, is you and Duncan, is that I did listen to like a couple of episodes. Like, I listened to your personality test one and what's the other one? I think the Mormon one.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's so many podcasts that talk about that stuff. Like, everyone's heard about like Mormons and what's the other one you guys did, like Holmes or something like that,
Yeah.
right? But it's just like how you talk about it and the dynamic between you two. Like I love the chemistry between you two, and you make this, even though other people talk about that subject, you make it interesting because of that dynamic.
And I think that's what people come for. Yeah. I mean, like you said, you can sort of get this information anywhere. I mean, you could go and do some research. We do try to do more than just, read a Wikipedia page or something. So
Right.
I think that we're doing something that not everyone can get everywhere, but there are plenty of places where you can go get great research about H. Holmes or about, Mormonism. And so, yeah, what's bringing people back. And we did a poll a while back about like, why do you listen to Miffy, MFFI,
Oh,
God,
nice.
call it Miffy. Why do you listen to Miffy? And people would, is it for like the banter or the facts and the information? And people just kept writing on there instead of choosing one. They kept saying came for the facts, stayed for you guys. And that's,
Oh,
that's what was really nice to hear, is like, that's what people are coming back for. And yeah, I mean, like I said, I think you just have to have ours is a little bit challenging because we don't have a niche. We don't have a lane. We're doing so many different broad topics that there's kind of a benefit in that people will find us through a lot of different random searches. But at the same time, we're not catering to a really, specific demographic, which you are. I mean, I think that like my wife, I told her I was going to be on your show and I mentioned Talkative Introvert. And she's like, that is a great name for a podcast. Cause she's like, she was like, that's me, that's like, she is someone who is very like, likes to be around. Like I said, she grew up with a bunch of people and she was always around them and she likes to talk, but she's very much an introvert. And so that, that has a hook to it. And it also is a very specific demographic. Like there are a lot of introverts in the world, and, people are going to search that out and they're going to look for someone who has those qualities that mirror something that they see in themselves. And so I think that's a really good kind of niche to have. And for anyone who is starting a podcast, I would say like, that's what you need. Don't try to do kind of what we do is almost a bad idea. It has worked out for us, but in retrospect, like, wow, what are we doing? We're just talking about all these different subjects and we're not talking to a specific type of person or demographic. And you really they call it niching down, and you really do want to niche down to like find your people and then communicate with them. And I think for us, we've been lucky in that we just had a very rabid fan base in the beginning who sort of took over for us and did a lot of marketing. We also did do some marketing. We bought like ads on, Spotify. We did a couple other things to sort of see how that would work, and it worked really well. And so, yeah, we're not, I don't know, we're never going to be Joe Rogan, but we're doing pretty well. We have a Patreon and we're actually like making money from the show, and that's been nice.
nice.
And we have a pretty dedicated fan base, and we are in the, we're definitely in the high thousands of downloads. But like, I remember, and this is something that someone told me in the beginning, and I might have heard it on another show, but they talked about like, I remember when we broke 100 downloads in a day, and that was a really exciting thing, right? Like within, pretty early on, and that was like a big deal at the time. And I remember thinking, putting in perspective and looking at other shows and then feeling bad about myself because I was like, oh, wait a minute, 100 is nothing. All these shows are doing thousands of downloads a day. And then I heard either someone told me or I heard, they said, well, imagine if all those people were in a room. Like you have 100 people who are downloading in a day, and, we released our episode and 100 people downloaded it. Like that's 100 people. If they all got in a room, that's 100 people that want to hear what you have to say every week. Like if you could get 100 people to go to a room every week, that's a decent little, comedy show. That's a good room of people. And so that is like, it's easy to sort of lose track because these numbers get bigger and bigger, and you start sort of losing track of the fact that these are individuals. Like every one of those people is a person, and that's a person who wants to listen to what you have to say and is benefiting from it in some way. And even if you only get 100 downloads, like that's 100 people that you're benefiting and communicating to directly. And that's pretty powerful. And you start to sort of lose track of that as you get these bigger numbers, because it just all blends together, and you're like, you just get into this thing where you want more and more, and you're like, we only got, 1,000 downloads today, and that's not, that's way less than yesterday. It's like, well, that's 1,000 shows that people listen to. That's a big deal. And so So same thing for anyone who's starting out again, just remember that even if you start out and your first episode gets 5 downloads, that's 5 people who listen to what you had to say. And if you get 5 downloads the next week, that means they came back because they liked what they heard the last time, and they're going to keep coming back. And so that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I think my fear though is the more, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but like the more people you have that listen to you, like that makes me nervous. Because
Yeah.
I'm like really, really small and I don't do advertising. I don't pay for any of it. It's all purely like word of mouth. And I'm very fortunate to have the listeners I have because I don't do that. I don't do ads. I don't even know how people found me. I think someone mentioned they literally just searched for introvert podcast and then found me, and that's how they got
Yeah.
it because they were
Yeah.
specifically looking for that. But I feel like I don't know. It's just a little scary when like the more downloads you get, it's more people listening. That's more people listening to you mess up if you accidentally say something like offensive or politically
Yeah.
incorrect or something.
No, that's true. That is something that has been interesting as we've grown. I mentioned even like our first episodes that were in our car or my car, and we were pretty irreverent at the time because no one was listening. So it was like it didn't matter. And Duncan was drunk, and so he could say anything. And
Yeah.
he's a very like sensitive guy. He's very like empathetic. He's very liberal. We're both very liberal, and so we're both very like sensitive to what we're saying and how it affects people. But at the time, we didn't feel like we had to be because no one was listening, so it didn't matter. And then later, as we started to grow, we started like looking at the old episodes and being like, "Oh God, like what did
Oh
we
my
say in
God.
those episodes?" Because now there's actually people who are going back and listening to those old episodes, and we're like, "Ooh, maybe not." I mean, we took down I think 3 episodes,
Oh,
mostly
really?
just yeah, mostly. I think 2 of them were mostly because I just thought they were terrible. Like Duncan was super drunk, and I was just like messing around. It was just a lot of, but one of them, yeah, we took down just because I said some things where I was like, I think this is going to be misinterpreted. I don't, and we've gone back and changed things. I mean, I remember making fun of Grumpy Cat. I was talking about an internet meme like Grumpy Cat, and I used the R word and said like, "Oh, Grumpy Cat's so cute," you know,
Yeah, and R.
and R, and just to me, like I love Grumpy Cat. Like I'm not insulting Grumpy Cat, and I also have friends who are have mental deficiencies and issues, and have at the time one of my employees had brain damage, and so it was like one of those things where I just said it, and I knew I know my heart. I know that I'm not I don't mean it in a way that's derogatory at all. But someone did. Someone messaged me and was like, "Hey, my brother has a mental deficiency, and that's a really insulting word." And I was like, "Oh wow," I just hadn't even thought of it, and so I went back and just edited it out. And it is one of those things where like you do as you get bigger, you do. I totally understand that you start to like. It's a little scary to be like, okay, wait a minute. A lot of people are listening to the next thing I say, and how is this going to? And we've talked about like we had a whole episode where one of the subjects was someone who had committed suicide with a gun, and we talked about we just sort of went off on a tangent about guns and got a lot of feedback on that. And it was interesting to find out that a lot of our listeners are in the South or the Midwest and like own guns and didn't agree with what we had to say. And it was interesting to feel like, well, the things we say do impact people, and they also can impact how people think of us. And what do we want to put out there, and how much do we want to kind of stick to our I guess
Your guns?
our gun, so to speak. um,
Yeah.
and and it's been interesting. I mean, we have I'm not very eh, I'm not quiet about the fact that I'm not a Trump supporter, and yet we have a couple fans who are. And they've contacted me, and they're not offended. They say, "Oh no, I get that you guys are liberals. We think, and we can totally disagree and still find you guys funny and love your show." And that's a little hard for me because I'm like, well, can we like there's part of me it's so antithetical to me. Like I hate Donald Trump so much personally that like I almost want to be like, no, I don't want you listening to my show. But A, I can't stop them, and B, like I need to get over that. This is an opportunity for me to talk to them from my perspective, and maybe it's going to change their mind. Maybe it's not. Maybe it has no impact at all, but it can't hurt. It's not going to hurt for them to be regularly listening every week to someone who disagrees with them on those issues. At least from my perspective, it's not going to hurt because I'm certainly not going to drive them more towards Donald Trump. So, it is interesting where you sort of, I don't know how much influence we have, but I do start to feel a responsibility as we've gotten bigger to take responsibility for the things that we say. And that is empowering in some ways, but like you said, also very like intimidating.
Yeah, because you don't know if it's like, sometimes I have to think about what I say. Like, is this an opinion or is this insensitive? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like if what I'm saying, I guess also like it makes me think of, how everyone's trying to cancel Kevin Hart because something he said 10 years ago. But you kind of have to think about the context too. Like, for example, in high school, when I was in high school, everyone called everything gay, and that
Mm-hmm.
was, but at the time that was normal. But obviously it's wrong. And I would never say that even back then. But like, you have to think about like that aspect too. Like, well, back then it was fine to say that, but now it's not okay to say that. And so I have to, I know I shouldn't really be thinking like, well, what are people 10 years later going to think of me now? But you can't stop thinking about it because that's what people do.
Absolutely. It's really weird. I do think that is something that hopefully is going to start changing, that people are going to realize that like you can't judge someone on the things they said 10 years ago. And I didn't have to deal with that when I was growing up because we didn't have social media. We weren't broadcasting everything. No one had a camera on their cell phone. So when I got drunk and said stupid things, and I remember, Duncan and I have talked about like one time I was on a hill in San Francisco, super drunk. It was like during the day. I was in college. We were all, I don't remember what it was, but it was some like, I think it might have been St. Patrick's Day. So we were just drunk during the day, and I was like standing on a hill, and I just like pulled my pants down to urinate because I just didn't care because I was wasted. And I'm like peeing on the road, and I fell over and rolled down the hill with my pants down, just like
Oh my
peeing the whole way
God.
down the hill in these like big looping arcs. And my friends thought it was hilarious. They've told that story a million times because there was like a group of, there were like tourists like walking around, and I'm just drunk on the street. And but today, like that could have ruined my life. Like someone would have just whipped out
Yeah.
a cell phone, and I'd be the guy who like peed on the street in the middle of the day and was rolling down the hill. Like employers could find that. That's something that you can't do that stuff anymore because someone's going to video it. And so it's just a different time. And I think we do need to remember that, like, look, we've all been young and stupid at some point, and we're not the same people we were. And so I do hope that that's changing to some extent. I think that people are starting to realize, as more and more people get canceled and go like, wait a minute, like this is not okay,
Yeah.
that we need to pull back on that a little bit. But at the same time, we are realizing that the things we say and do, especially if you want to be an influencer, if you're trying to be a celebrity and you want to be an influencer, the word influencer means you're going to influence people. And so we do have to there is some level of responsibility there, but I don't think we should hold people responsible for who they used to be. We need to hold them responsible for who they are now and how they're acting now. And if someone is unrepentant about anything they said in the past and still acting like that, then that's a problem. But if someone is like, oh my God, that was 10 years ago, I'm so embarrassed about that, let it go. At least that's where I'm at. And then the other thing is like, we do have to draw lines. We have, like I said, a small amount of people who probably disagree with us politically, and then probably a large fan base that agrees with us and may even go a little bit further. Like there was an episode that we did on megafauna, and we were talking about dinosaurs, and I kept saying he because that's just something that in my head, like I like to personify something, right? So we were talking about T-Rex, and I was like, oh, look, he's so cute. Like like, look at this little guy. He's like running through the forest or something. I just kept saying he. And one person messaged me and was like, how do you know it was a he? There are female T-Rexes, and, we need to be sensitive. And that's one of those things where it's like, I get where you're coming from, but also no, Like I'm gonna call the T my imaginary T-Rex in my head can be a he if I want it to. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to worry about whether I'm misgendering the T-Rex that doesn't exist, right? So
Right.
like there's a point where we just do have to draw a line and say like, okay, if you want to try to cancel me for that, feel free. But I'm sticking to my guns on that. I don't care if the T-Rex is a guy or a girl.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting time where sort of you have to decide for yourself, like, where are these lines and where are the lines that I'm willing to respect? And how important is this to, again, stick to my, quote unquote guns?
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. Because I don't know, like as a celebrity or influencer, people are just expecting perfection from you. They expect you to
Hmm.
be the model citizen. And it's like, it's just impossible. No one can be that. That's just such a high expectation for people.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, I think that we have unrealistic expectations of our celebrities, but I think we also, in some ways, yeah, we hold them to unrealistic standards, but in sometimes I'm surprised at how little celebrities are able to live up to even modest standards. Like it's
Yeah. Yeah.
like even we have the Johnny Depp trial going on or just finished up
Oh,
finally,
geez.
and you've got like that's a celebrity that I really respected. Like I loved Johnny Depp when I was growing up, and he was in all these great movies, Edward Scissorhands and Ed Wood, and all these took all these quirky roles, and he seemed like such a sensitive artist guy, and he was so outside. He was a superstar, but he was outside the normal kind of superstar culture. He wasn't making action movies and things. And to see him just be a complete mess, like that is something where it's been sort of painful to watch. It's like I wanted more from him. I expected more from him. And I don't think it was unrealistic to expect him to not be a coked out drunk who yells at his girlfriend. And whether you hate Amber Heard or not, or his wife, whether you hate her or not, like you can't say Johnny Depp was a nice guy in that relationship. I mean, if you watched any of the videos, and he was coked out and yelling and slamming things and drunk and drinking whole glass, bottles of wine by himself. And he may have had a lot of things going on mentally, but he was not okay, and what he was doing wasn't okay. And it just, in some ways, like this celebrity culture and everyone being an influencer puts people in a situation where now you get to see all their flaws, and it kind of undermines the thing. Like I sort of miss putting a celebrity on a pedestal and not not having that pedestal knocked out from under them constantly because you find out that they're a terrible person or something. So yeah, it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, you definitely have to practice, separating the art from the artist for sure.
Exactly.
That's why I'm like, I don't really look up to any celebrities because I don't actually know them. For all we know, the nicest celebrity in the world could be like a serial killer, you know?
Exactly. It's so important. That is such an important thing, and I'm pretty good at it for the most part. Like I can still listen to Michael Jackson, like I like Michael Jackson
Yeah.
songs, but that's hard. I mean, that guy's terrible. Like the things that he did are awful, but at the
Yeah.
same time, like that doesn't make the music any less, those songs slap, and I don't care if you did, the person who made them might have been awful, but at least they produced something great. So, I'm not going to give money. I'm not going to go buy Michael Jackson songs or something. I'm not going to give, he's gone, so I guess it doesn't matter. But, they're like someone like Louis C.K. is a good example. Like, I'm not going to go
Oh,
to a
jeez.
Louis show now. Like, I'm not going to go pay
Hmm.
him money now. But that doesn't mean that I'm still not going to laugh at the stuff that was hilarious that he did in the past. Um,
Right.
I can still separate that.
Yeah. Though I was talking to my friends, like, who's a celebrity you just can't, like, even though, like, tons of celebrities do bad things, but my can't is Chris Brown. I just
Yeah.
I just can't. And he's a great singer, great dancer, very entertaining, but just that picture I remember seeing when I was younger of like Rihanna on the
Mhm.
news, that's like the picture I see every time I hear his voice. So he's my can't.
I don't know who my can't would be. I think Chris Brown is definitely like a can't, but I didn't care that much about him in the first place. Like I'm not a huge, I was
Yeah.
never a huge Chris
Well,
Brown
that's
fan
helpful.
so for me, I was like, okay, good. I don't have to listen to this guy that I didn't like anyway. Although there's like a couple songs. He did a song with like Usher or something that I like, but other than that,
Hmm.
and then, yeah, I don't know who my can't would be. I think that I'm fortunate in that a lot of the people that have turned out to be really awful are people that I just wasn't that big of a fan. Like, Cosby, like I didn't grow, Cosby is hard for me because I did grow up with him not as a comedian, but as the Cosby Show, as like the America's father, and that has been hard. I don't think I could. I don't think I could go back and watch the Cosby Show and be okay with it nowadays. It's just so hard to separate like the guy who's giving you life lessons from the guy who is a date rapist. But at the
Yeah.
same time, I don't think I would want to go watch the Cosby Show anyway. I mean, it's so old, like who has no relevance. So it's not something that I'm like missing from my life. So yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. I'd have to think about who my cant is, because like I said, I am pretty good at separating. There are a lot of people that I just dislike, but I admit that they're great at what they did.
Yeah, it's true. All right. Well, we've hit the hour mark, over the hour mark. So I wanted to ask if there's any last minute things you wanted to talk about, or if you want to tell the audience where they can find information about you and your podcast and your comedy.
Well, yeah, thanks for the opportunity. I've enjoyed being on here. Right now, the main thing is MFFI. The Midnight Facts for Insomniacs is the best place to find. We have, 100 and something episodes out now. There's a topic for everyone. We've got a little bit of everything in there. And I think I'm really proud of that show. I'm really enjoying it. So that's the best place to find me. And then ShaneRogers.net is where once I'm ready to really get out and book shows, I have a bunch of bookers who've luckily, I'm very lucky to still have a relationship with a lot of the bookers from before COVID. And so I have a lot of opportunities to get out there. And so as soon as I've got the material where I want it, that's where you can find shows. I'll be posting all my shows on ShaneRogers.net like I used to pre-COVID. And there are pictures and some clips and things there as well. So ShaneRogers.net, but mostly check out Midnight Facts for Insomniacs. And I hope people keep listening to this show because I think it's great.
Thank you. All right. Well, that is a wrap. Thanks so much for joining me and being a part of this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thank you again for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for making it to the end. If you enjoy what you hear and want to stay up to date on the show, please follow me on Facebook and or on Instagram. You can also check out my website at thetalkativeintrovertpodcast.com. All the information will be on there as well as in the show notes. If you want to help support the show, please review and rate the podcast and share it with your friends and family. Thanks so much, and I'll talk to you guys in the next episode.